What screams, "I'm bad with money"? Before we start, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next videos. I wish you a pleasant viewing experience. Story 1. My mom and sister lived together still, couldn't afford rent or their car between the two of them. Nearly had the car repossessed and were closing in on eviction until my grandmother loaned them. She explicitly said, "Pay me back when you're more stable, enough money to keep the car and stay in their apartment." 4 months later, my sister gets her tax refund for $4,500. She had a kid and isn't with the father. And instead of making any effort to pay my grandmother back, pay off the car, or have any sort of emergency fund, the two of them buy an expensive purebred puppy, Airedale Terrier. They dropped over $2,000 for the dog and then spent another $500 on a crate, toys, leashes, and dog food. Less than 6 months later, they lost the car and were evicted. They moved in with my aunt, and her husband disliked the dog, so it was taken to the SPCA. It wasn't even a year old. My grandmother didn't see a cent of money returned before she died. So, people bad with money buy things they can't afford instead of stabilizing what they already have. Answer: the saddest part of that is the poor dog that doesn't understand. My old apartment neighbor bought his 2 teenage kids a husky pup after him, and his wife went into escrow on a house. But he didn't check with her before getting the dog. Was supposed to be a surprise, but she wasn't happy. Well, the house seller pulled out. Husky pups grow big and fast. Both parents worked, so the pup lived in their app patio all day for like 6 months. It was bored, so it howled and tore everything up. Other neighbors filed noise complaints, and the dog had to be given up. I think he paid a pretty big sum of money for the poor animal as well. Story 2. I work on cars for a living, and the vast majority of the BMWs that come into my shop have slick tires and lights blinking on their dash. So many of these people can barely afford a luxury car, let alone the maintenance required to keep them nice and running. Answer: I was in a Costco years ago buying tires. There was a couple in there also buying tires, and the guy was meanie and moaning about how much the tires were going to cost. He was going on and on about how ridiculous the prices were. Finally, his wife just looked at him and said, "You just had to buy an Escalade. Did you think we were going to save money with it?" That shut him up. Story 3. I had a buddy in college who would go through a cycle of bragging about how much money he had, spend it all on dumb stuff, then brag about how poor he was, all while bragging how he was a rich kid. The best part was when he was bragging about having some money to this girl he liked. Turns out that girl came from an actually wealthy family. She said, "It's only $5,000. Why do you keep mentioning it?" Is that a lot to you? That event shut him up for a bit, LOL. Answer: had a coworker like this. Lied his jerk off about what he had. I had another coworker who was pretty well off. His father died and left a bit of money, which he flipped into 2 to 3 lucrative side hustles. After months of the dipshit, who was stealing and using company money to buy pizza for his lunch among other things, the other guy decided to shut him up. "Yay, I've got 3 Harleys and a H2 at my storage unit, blah, blah, blah." So the other guy says, "I just bought an $80,000 dump truck to rent to local construction companies. Because they pay well, I'll break even in 8 months and I could afford it." The blabbermouth calls him a liar. So the other guy showed him his phone with his bank website pulled up and $650,000 in checking. Dude got real quiet for like 20 minutes. Story 4. Depends on what you call bad. My sister has been a saver penny pincher since childhood, which was a bit traumatic, admittedly. She is now nearing retirement, and everything she and her husband have is paid off. She isn't rich, but will have the comfortable retirement she has earned and deserves. She disliked going into debt, and her cards are paid down monthly. Sounds great, right? It would be if she wasn't so completely obsessed and angered by people who don't do or think as she does, including her husband. For instance, her house and cars are modest to decent, while her friends are all buying nicer things, vacation homes, travel, and other luxury items. Most, if not all, of these things are paid for with credit, and it just drives her crazy. She is so jealous of what they have, yet so angry at how they got it. On the occasion that she and her husband join friends for a cruise or resort stay, her main concern is cost, which ruins a huge part of the trip for her every time. And monitoring how others are wasting their money, never to their faces. This is just what she says to me after. Her husband used to be a pretty fun guy about 30 years ago when they met, but has become bitter and grumpy after decades of having to fight for things she deems unnecessary, like tickets to his favorite concerts or pricey sports music memorabilia, which he's always been into. It has resulted in dishonesty between the two, which is not the kind of guy he really is, and she has grown disgusted by his need for childish hobbies and entertainment. My sister has always been a bit of a fun hater, but it's gotten to the point where it makes her, and sometimes the people around her, miserable. She lives and works in a small town and pays attention to who is getting free lunch, who is paying with food stamps at checkout, who is driving a car they can't afford, etc. She has called me and listed the items she's seen a family buying with food stamps. Can't fathom them buying Doritos and Kool-Aid. There is more than one way to be bad with money. Answer: I wish this response was higher up. More people need to see and understand this. Balance, while difficult to attain and then maintain, is key. It's okay being able to save, but you're also well entitled to spend what you've earned and finance that spending in ways that you can still sustainably cover. Going too far in either direction will always have its pitfalls. Story 5. Looking at payment amount and not purchase price. A coworker asked one time, "This phone is $1,300, but I can get it for just 60 miles for 2 years. Seems like a good deal to me." 60 miles isn't that much. Should I do it? I asked him, "Does your phone work?" "Yes." "Okay. If someone dropped $1,300 in your lap right now, is this what you would spend it on?" "No. Then it's not a good use of your money." He showed up to work the next week with the brand new phone. Another coworker wanted a Honda Ridgeline. He went to a car broker and said he wanted this truck. X years, Y miles, and his payment could only be $500. He was amazed the guy got him the truck for that payment. He had no idea what his final purchase price was, what his loan term was, or what his interest rate was. All he knew was that he could afford the payment. Answer: interest rates and loan terms on vehicles are astronomical and still getting worse. I can't even fathom the idea of still owing money on a car that you've owned for 5 years. The highest interest rate I've seen on a car is 24.1, and ironically, that was on a 4-cylinder Mustang. Caleb Hammer viewers know what I'm talking about. The normal loan term being 6 years is already crazy, and I've seen some 7 years loans as well. It's only going to be a matter of time before 8-year terms are a thing. That's crazy. And some of these 6-year loans have monthly payments that are into 4 digits. You might as well be renting a car at that point. Story 6. Buying new clothes, shoes, phones, adult beverage, plant substance, etc. before all your bills are paid. Answer: my ex-friend used to do this. She was always behind on rent, but still was always buying new clothes, plant substance, going out to eat, going out to the bars, etc. After breaking up with her ex, who BTW was an awful POs, and even though she and I are no longer friends, I'm grateful every day she's away from that bastard, she moved back in with her parents. She used to complain to me how they would give her dirty looks when she came down wearing something new, when she had a $50K a year job her dad got for her, was living with them, rent-free with 0 bills, aside from phone and gas, and her dad even paid for the new brakes on her car, which was also free from her sister's old car she got for free. I'm pretty sure shopping and plant substance were her ways to cope with mental health issues, and fair enough. But the reasons we're no longer friends was her complete lack of accountability and constant victimhood. I hope she figures it all out one day. Anyway, got a little far off the prompt, LOL. Story 7. As someone who is formerly bad with money, being in a cycle of being in debt and using apps to borrow money to pay towards your credit cards and to have money for food. Thankfully, I'm no longer trapped in this cycle, and I never want to be in that cycle again. Answer: I will be honest, some of it was luck. I moved in with my then BF, now fiancé, and his grandfather. I help with expenses, but the house is paid off. This is obviously not an option for everyone, but it helps to not have to pay $1K per month. With all that said, my fiancé sat me down and taught me how to budget. For the first couple of months, he budgeted with me until I got the hang of it. I focused on how much I could afford to put towards my debt each month. I deleted all of the apps that I used to borrow money. I put as much as I could afford to pay, but I paid off the credit card that had the most interest on it first. I always paid well over the minimum. I don't know if any of this is helpful at all. Only debt I have now is student loan debt, and I will hopefully get that paid off through the PSLF program in a few years. I also paid off my car last year, and now I have money to put towards other things. Story 8. My family is in 20K of debt, but my mother and her brother just went on her 13th trip to Spain in the last 12 months. Because I can afford it, she snapped at 3 a.m. on a Sunday morning as I caught sneaking out for another on. She thinks that I'll get a well-paying job to bail her out, which is not happening because if I gave her the money for the debt, she'd probably spend it all from when she leave the house. And on the way to the bank, she works a minimum wage, 12 hours a week job, high school dropout, and has my father deported after an argument when I was young, bragging about it to this day. My older sister, a full-time college student, has a part-time job at the same place she works at and earns almost 2x as much, minus the overtime. Answer: if you want to pay her debt, do not give her the money, pay the debt. directly. However, you must be able to see that even if you do that, she's going to just gather up more debt. She seems like someone who should be kept at low contact when you can get your own place and job. Like maybe getting lunch on your dime once a week to catch up. A couple of phone calls, that sort of thing. But as you said, she may be willing to try to guilt trip you for money later. So be careful. And don't co-sign anything to make debt family debt. As the other user pointed out, it's her debt, so long as you haven't signed anything. Story 9. My ex-wife. Before divorce, we filed bankruptcy. 80 of the debt was in her name. Divorced over other reasons, but money was part of it. Left her the house, but she could not keep up with bills. Instead of selling, had to be foreclosed on. She met a guy and they moved on a rented house. He maintained bills and wasn't a bad guy. I even met a few times. They broke up and again, she was evicted for not paying rent and bills. Now she lives with her sister and the kids I was paying child support for. Now live with me. 3 years living with her sister and she still can't afford to move out. Story 10. People who put pictures of money around their house saying that money will manifest into their lives. I met a whole group of these people through my ex-wife once, and not a single one of them has a consistent or successful work history. Story 11. My wife has 2 friends that are the worst people I've ever met with money. Friend 1, they have a kid and are convinced that they can make it on one income because my parents could do it. The wife has a shopping addiction and is constantly buying expensive clothes for her baby and things for the house. The husband works stocking shelves and drives Uber sometimes. They had a $70K settlement that they threw down the drain in about a year. They got evicted from their apartment for not paying and had their Cadillac that they are paying $750 a month for repossessed twice. They are now moving into a more expensive house renting. According to my rough estimate, their house and car cost more than the retail salary the sole income is making. Friend 2 also has a child, also has their, more reasonable in fairness, car repossessed many times. They moved out of state for the husband's job that he was making good money and he lost his job for not showing up. Moved back and started begging for money constantly, asking their parents, friends, and even me, not really a friend, but I guess she got my Venmo to request money, and got evicted because they haven't paid rent in months. They are not looking for jobs, nor are they looking for apartments. They will probably soon be homeless with their kid. A shame because that job they moved out of state for can get up to $150K, but I said he's unemployed and she's working at a daycare part-time. Nice people, all of them. And I understand times are hard because we're still young and moved out, but I've never met 4 people so bad at handling money. Story 12. Living paycheck to paycheck and eat ordering out. If you barely have enough money at the end of the month, you shouldn't be doing that. It sucks. I think wages need to go up, but it is what it is. Story 13. My girlfriend and I keep our finances separate. Why? She once did some extra work somewhere for 1 day only, and this was paid well. 2 weeks later, she came up to me asking for some money. Me. Why? Her. Because I still haven't got my money for this work I had done recently. Me. So? This was a one-time thing? It should have given you extra money, but now you're out of money? Her. Yes, I already bought some things I wanted. Me. Even if they didn't pay you already, what about the money you usually earn? Turns out she literally spends everything she gets. Now she got some extra money and already spent it on even more useless stuff. That's why we keep finance separated. I would be bankrupt if she had access to my account. Answer. Homie, I'm in your boat. I was raised as a saver, she was not. It runs me up a wall some days. It helps to ask earnest and sincere questions about why they're spending what they are and why they think they need those things. I found that at one point, she had been dead jerk broke and had her money stolen by an ex. She was left completely destitute. Soon I would discover that when she spends and buys things, it's to hedge against having money in an account that can be taken away, resulting in when she needs money, she sells the stuff she's purchased. It's not financially smart, but it's something she's had to do to survive for years, and old habits die hard. Kinda like if your parents or grandparents grew up during the Great Depression, they would habitually save the last bit of food no matter how measly the serving or how well-to-do they were, because food was scarce during that time. I've gotten her on the right track though. It takes patience and time. Right now, she's maxing out her employee matching and then some, giving 10 and having 6 matched on top of that into retirement. Story 14. Talking about payday. If the day that 2 double highs of wages hits your bank account changes your spending habits, you're in trouble. Answer. For me, every bill and investment gets taken out on payday. I literally do not have a single obligation that I need to worry about between the 2 Fridays when I get paid. With that said, when you do that, You might be a little short if something comes up in between. Oh shoot, I need to buy a new tire. I'm not going out to lunch until payday. I for darn sure ain't getting DoorDash. Story 15. Shurina gets nails done. Hey, can I borrow 50? I'm not going to be able to make my insurance payment tomorrow unless I can come up with it somehow. Story 16. Impulse buying and never checking the price of anything. Edit. One unique case. A guy I knew in college that seemed very mentally unstable, that would spend very recklessly in little things like claw machines and other things. We tell him to slow down and he always replies, "It's okay, my parents are rich." And from what I know, his parents weren't. Story 17. My friend bought 2 rent-to-own couches. She makes over 90K. I'm not sure how much her husband currently makes, but it's over 50K. That's what he made before a promotion. Why? Why buy a couch like this? Their dogs tore it up after only having it for 1 month, but they owed 2 more years on the couches. The couches were less than 2K, and they're fabric, not leather. She also bought a boat, but didn't buy a trailer or a vehicle that can tow the boat. So her brother took the boat to use it, and she hasn't seen it since 3 years ago. Story 18. Shoot place to live, but a 700-month car note. I found a strong correlation between habitually late people and poor money management also. Story 19. During a vacation in Seattle, Darkside Phil spent as much money as possible, yet complained about being poor afterwards. Story 20. Nice cars outside rundown homes. If you have a 50K vehicle and a tarp on your roof, you most likely have your priorities in the wrong order. When I worked in finance at a dealership, it was insane the amount of people coming in looking for higher trim level vehicles for 50K on 50K household incomes. Story 21. My neighbor, who's a renter, just bought a Cybertruck to park alongside his Porsche. And yesterday the mailman mistakenly gave us some of his mail, and it included a postcard from the power company saying he owes more than $400 and they're about to shut off his power. So, all of that. Story 22. When you get a relatively large insurance settlement after becoming permanently disabled in a way that prevents you from working and needing to live off that money for an unknown amount of time, then immediately dropping several $1,000s on redoing the entire living room in camo. Also knowing you'll be in a wheelchair for about 3 to 4 months and spending another several thousand out of that limited sum to turn the already good-sized back porch into a giant deck so you can roll around in bigger laps. Story 23. Renting something to own it from Rent-A-Center because you couldn't afford to buy it outright. My brother-in-law and sister-in-law do this shoot all the time, and their justification is asinine. Well, I justify it because I can't afford to pay the $500 right now, but I can afford to pay $100 in Malaysia Mariners over the course of 7 months, or some stupid shoot like that. Basically, they can't afford the lump sum price now, but they can afford to make monthly payments that add up to way more than the actual price of the thing. Answer. We did this when our washing machine died. Most of the time, if you pay off within 90 days, it doesn't cost much more than paying it up front. We couldn't afford the cost up front, but we paid off in 90 days. We couldn't afford to go 90 days without a working washing machine, so paying a couple hundred extra not to have to suffer was worth it. I could also see doing this for a fridge, but a couch or a TV, no. I might see doing it for a mattress if you aren't sure if you will like the mattress. Story 24. My roommate, downstairs goblin, refuses to go to a store or cook. Instead, he DoorDashes 3 times a day, then asks for help with rent. Story 25. I kept my savings in an account earning 0.25 interest compounded quarterly for many years before I finally moved it to an account earning 5 compounded monthly, so I guess I'm pretty bad with money. Edit. The interest actually compounds daily and is deposited into my account monthly. Story 26. Buying a new car because your old one is going to be out of warranty soon and you can't afford an unexpected repair bill. Then buying the new one based on monthly payments and not OTD price. And then doubling down and letting them basically steal your trade-in, which had equity. Had a friend do this. We had the same car 6 years ago. Mine is lower trim level. Friend replaced theirs twice since I got mine because of the warranty thing each time. Mine's been paid off for years. Why not just pay it off and bank the payment money for repairs? He'll never understand this. Story 27. Buying a new car but rolling in negative equity from your trade-in because you didn't finish paying off the last one before you convinced yourself you deserve a new one. Similarly, people who birth one kid and insist that they need a $80K land yacht SUV for one tiny kid in a car seat. Story 28. Go on the Camaro or Charger subreddit and look at all the people getting their $80K cars stolen because they can't afford to keep it in a garage. Story 29. constantly complaining about not having money but spending 20 per day on energy drinks, snacks, and vapes from 711. Story 30. I mentioned to a coworker that I was retiring next year in January, and she asked me how. I told her it's because of our 401k, which is very generous. We both have been at the same organization for over 25 years, and she said she has almost nothing in her 401k. I said, why don't you have much in your 401k? It's been a 200 match up to 5 of your gross for 25 years. You should be loaded. She said, every time the economy goes down, like in the .com crash, or the housing crisis, or the COVID crash, etc., I would see how low it was getting, get scared and take it out and spend the money. So basically, she paid taxes and penalties every time the stock market bottomed out when it was worth the least. She also complains how the system is against people because she can't retire when she wants to now. Story 31. Owning a timeshare. Full disclosure, I own a timeshare. LOL, in my defense, my mother was going to have to file bankruptcy because of it if I didn't take it off her hands, because they're practically unsellable even though it has a deed, so I got it for free. Not only is the original model a bad investment, but now people are paying $20,000 for vacation points that they can use anywhere, and then having to pay $1,000 a year or more on maintenance for points, which makes no sense whatsoever. At least I can pretend the $1,000 a year I pay for maintenance goes to actually maintaining the piece of property I pretend to own. But for $1,000 a week, I could find a very nice unit to rent in the same area. Definitely a bad money move. Answer. I got suckered into a timeshare presentation. It was supposed to be a quick tour of the unit, but they had this sales lady pelting us with boring details at a tiny table for an hour before we even got to see the unit. Ran out after the meeting and took our 200 gift card for agreeing to take the tour. Digital sent through email, covered a nice dinner for the whole family. There were other families' couples locked into rooms with their own sales reps, pelting them with the same information. Luckily, we had a table in the lobby we could just run away from. Story 32. Tattoos for the most part. I have them and love them. But the number of times I've seen friends show off fresh ink just a week after complaining about money. Answer. I'm embarrassed of how this looks when it has happened to me. I set up appointments for new tattoos 3 to 4 months out, and I pay for 12 of it or more when I set it up. This winter, I was all, oh shoot, I need new brakes. This sucks. And it was an expense that I handled, but it just totally caught me off guard, so I did complain about it. Then I got a new tattoo the next week, and I knew exactly how it looked. Story 33. Not participating in a company matching 401k. That's free, tax-deferred money the company is just giving you. Story 34. Getting the newest and best that comes out every year when your last works fine. Source. I'm bad with money. Story 35. Having an expensive car and complaining about how everything is so expensive or that they can't afford something. I have someone in my circle that makes nearly 100k from home. No student debt or anything like that, but absolutely refuses to live anywhere but downtown in the city. 2k rent per month, purchased an expensive car, $900 monthly payment, has to pay to park it, $100 per month, and doesn't drive it. They meanie about having over half of their money disappear every month when they could just not have purchased a 85k paperweight and moved 20 miles north to a nice suburb for half the rent. Same person will say shoot like eat the rich, and in reality, they're squandering over 50 of their cash every month on shoot they don't need. Don't even get me started on the bills from eating out, traveling, etc. Smart person, bad with money. Story 36. Making 6 figures, only having to take care of yourself, but calling me and asking if you can borrow 100. Story 37. More cars than people who can drive in the household. Not always the case, but it's a pretty good indicator. Story 38. Financial illiteracy is pandemic, and many people don't realize how bad is it. For example, they don't understand that paying the minimum wage on credit card is a bad idea, or worse, people that don't value money and time. Story 39. Having an expensive gas-guzzling truck that you floor the pedal with every time you drive, but then blame Biden for why gas is expensive. Story 40. The urge to burn through money each time they lay hands on some. These people don't have a stable financial flow, and they're either indulging, either repeatedly lending from friends and family. Most are deadbeats who can't resist the desire to spend it all on themselves again, instead of paying off their debts. Story 41. When you are an unemployed adult living in someone else's house for free, and you buy a horse saddle. You don't own a horse, nor does anyone you know. Story 42. Giving loads of money to your favorite celebrities. I'm thinking about streamers, but it could be anything. I'm not gifting $50 to someone who makes tens of thousands a month. Story 43. Extreme lifestyle inflation and/or infinity chasing. I have a lot of associates who work in high-paying professional jobs that are constantly swapping out their house car every time that they get a raise. Yet they constantly complain about being short on money. A lot of them are closer to financial ruin despite making multiple times more than I do in a mechanical optical engineering. I've also encountered a few of those gotta hustle, gotta grind, gotta monetize every walking moment of your life people, and they, in my experience, usually work so hard because they're infinity chasing. They don't actually have any tangible goals or ambitions, so make the pile bigger is all they really have going for them. Story 44. 700 car with thousands of dollars worth of cheap bullshit on it. Lights, stickers, exhaust, spoilers, subs, rims, etc. Y'all look like clowns. Story 45. Insisting you need that all-inclusive resort in the tropics for your mental health. Your doctor said it's great for your lungs and you got it so cheap. Story 46. Low-income job, no judgment, just understanding a budget, complains to everyone that they can't afford rent and/or car payment, but they come into work with a venti Starbucks every morning, have lunch delivered by DoorDash, and go out to dinner after work at least 3 times weekly. Story 47. Honestly, going to bars or clubs. Literally, nobody I know that goes to bars or clubs ever seems to have any money excluding the strippers. I went to school with that work there. Story 48. We don't spend that much, per observation. 2 to 3 restaurant meals a week, 3 to 4 runs to just got to grab a this, that, the other at various stores. I'm bored. Let's go to the movies. Brags about doing most of their shopping at a dollar store. Honey, $100 worth of cheap shoot is still $100 out of your account. The tiniest leak will sink the mightiest battleship, Rockefeller, when asked why he paid so much attention to pennies and nickels when running his businesses. Story 49. Big pickups that only get used for daily commutes. Doubly so if they have lift kits and huge wheels and tires. Story 50. Not understanding the concept of value for money. An example that comes to mind is soda. At least where I'm from, a typical can of Coke or Mountain Dew is about $2, and you're getting a cup of the stuff, 250 milliliter. But for 3 to 4, you can get a 1.5L bottle of either drink. Therefore, spending that extra money for a larger quantity is more value for your money, especially since you get 4x time the amount of drink for double the price. Alternatively, if you had a 6-pack of eggs for $3 and a 12-pack of eggs for $10, then the 12-pack of eggs wouldn't be good value for money. Sometimes what seems like good value really isn't. Story 51. The most obvious answer is an expensive car on a low or moderate income. A lot of people buy enormous pickups or luxury cars that they can't actually afford and then complain about living paycheck to paycheck. A subtle, counterintuitive answer is thinking that having no debt at all is a virtue. A lot of low-income, unsophisticated people who got burned by credit card debt in the past go on to raise their kids to think that debt is inherently a bad thing. They'll take bizarre pride in the fact that they saved for 18 months to buy a refrigerator instead of buying it on an 18-month zero repayment schedule. Sometimes they don't have credit cards at all and just sort of squeeze by in life with a debit card and the shittiest clunker they could afford with pure cash. These people are just as bad with money. They've just fooled themselves into thinking they're virtuous for it. They're like people who won't keep knives in the kitchen because they might cut themselves trying to slice a tomato. So they just rip tomatoes apart with their bare hands when trying to make a salad. Story 52. Anybody driving an expensive car on a modest salary. I am not impressed by your willingness to finance at predatory interest rates. Story 53. Chasing hardware and never satisfied with what they have. They have a perfectly good thing, but they need that other thing, which is ever so slightly different. It's a constant cycle of expensive switching or micro upgrades, which, since they're bad with money, ends up on a CC that they don't pay off. They end up digging themselves into debt a little deeper and paying double on said items when it's all done, to add on top of the above, CC debt in general. Sure, there may have been a legit emergency and they had no choice, but 99.9% of people just accept it as a way of life and keep going negative. Live within your means while bettering yourself to sustain the way of life you want. Don't try and achieve that on CC debt. It won't work out. Too much unsustainable instant gratification. Story 54. When you complain that you can afford rent or medicine, yet every day you go out to eat and go to bars with friends. I know friends like this who complain about cost of living and how hard it is to make ends meet when they spend money as quick as they earn it. They also keep adopting dogs. Story 55. You literally don't know what happened to your money. It comes and goes like water. There are people who make a lot of money and just blow through it. If you ask them on what, they could barely tell you. no strategy, no budget, and a serious lack of security as a result, despite making six figures. Story 56. Doesn't have money for rent or bills, but always able to go get plant substance and drinks almost daily. Story 57. I skimmed through this post and noticed something is missing, and that is not taking care of your health, not brushing your teeth and flossing, not wearing sunscreen, consuming too much sugar and not exercising, listening to music too loudly, etc. Daily health maintenance and prevention is not expensive. Story 58. My uncle asked Grandma for a lot of money to invest and start a business. Months later, Grandma asked, "So how's your business?" He says, "Good. I'm investing in real estate." Grandma goes, "Oh, that's great. Where is it located?" He didn't know. Did he have a contract? No. He literally handed money to his friend and trusted him to invest for him. Did he ever see this friend again? No. Story 59. Buying yourself all the expensive toys, treats, ATV, expensive car, mani-pedi all the time, fancy clothes, a boat, etc. But you've saved nothing for your kids' education. Story 60. Everything they own comes from a subscription service. Groceries from apps or DoorDash, etc. Subscriptions for toiletries bi-monthly, more streaming services than they could ever watch. Excessive Patreon OF subs. My friend had to declare bankruptcy because she signed up for too many of these things, and it drained at least 2 credit cards. When it was all said and done, she said she didn't even recognize some of the things she was apparently paying for. Story 61. Always needing to buy new name brand purses. I can see investing in one, but having a whole closet full of expensive purses is crazy. Story 62. Dude showed up in a beaten-up truck that barely ran and hadn't worked in 2 years and owed the government a pile of money. Made one check and was bragging about his new VR and 5K gaming setup he just bought. Then asked everyone for help to boost his truck when it failed to work. Story 63. Most people I know who smoke a lot of plant substance have money issues. My philosophy was always, if I have money for substances, I should have everything else covered. But that seems to be a novel take. Story 64. Buying cheap, trendy stuff in bulk instead of a couple of classic quality items. This applies to clothes, furniture, etc. Having a salary job and not investing anything. I also feel like the more obsessed you are with money, the worse you are at handling it. Not a hard and fast rule, but it shows you have a weird relationship with it to some degree. Story 65. What my younger sister does, constantly asks us for money to buy essentials with, despite working full-time. But there's always money for her to buy tobacco and smoke 20 a day. Story 66. Oh, I got one that I just learned recently. I've never had a credit card because my grandmother raised me to believe they are an immediate recipe for debt and financial destruction. I used to brag about this, but last week I posted about my fiance having hidden credit card debt, and when I prided myself in never having credit cards, people came for me saying it's not the flex I think it is, which I fully agree now. I'm still researching, but I intend to open one with a lower limit soon to boost my credit score. Story 67. Complaining about being broke with a 15-pack of cigarettes in a jacket pocket while reaching for them with a hand and arm covered with tattoos. Story 68. I can't find the study, likely incredibly unscientific, and correlation isn't causation, but still interesting, that looked into it, but statistically, people who buy chrome car accessories tend to be the least likely to pay back a loan, and people who buy birdseed tend to be more likely to pay back a loan. I believe it was a study by credit bureaus that looked into correlations between items purchased and credit score, and those 2 items were the most polarizing. Story 69. Owes their coworker $20, walks in and tells said coworker that they bought a $200 ukulele because the guy only wanted $75 for it. Meanie. Story 70. When I worked in restaurants, people would talk about how they needed money, but refused to pick up extra shifts. When they did work, they'd spend all their tips after work at the bar. Trust me, I understand the lifestyle and need to blow off steam after work, but pay your bills first. Story 71. Wasting your money on vapes plant substance to find comfort in stressful situations instead of getting a therapist. I said what I said. Story 72. Paying $500 for a fake designer bag that looks like it's a 10K bag, except everybody knows it's fake BC, you can't afford a 10K bag. Story 73. I have this coworker, right? She's asking someone about credit cards, and I heard her mention how she's only ever paying off the minimum every month on multiple cards. Meanwhile, and I am not exaggerating when I say every single day she goes out to lunch and brings back food from some restaurant. To top it all off, she recently came back from medical leave for a voluntary cosmetic surgery. Story 74. Someone my wife used to work with had a huge amount of savings for retirement. I forget the exact figure, but he and his wife had mid-six figures. During the cryptocurrency NFT craze, he unilaterally emptied their retirement account and dumped it into crypto. Less than 2 months later, the value had plummeted to less than 10% of what it was when he bought it. They lost darn near everything, and now they are divorced. Story 75. If your billionaire dad lets you run the Star Wars franchise into the ground because of your internal guilt. Story 76. Driving any of the Hellcat Mopars. I just assume your IQ and interest rate are in the double digits. Story 77. Expensive car, expensive clothes, all of the new gadgets, but live in a dump. People that are bad money will buy all there is to buy in the sub 50K range, but will never be able to afford anything beyond that. Story 78. Well, my wife, soon-to-be ex, quit her job while I was deployed as I provided for the ransom. She burnt through all her savings and asked me for money a bit. She left me for another dude and now I'm leaving, and she won't have that support, so she had to get a job and could only get one as a waitress as she has no education or anything. She's broke AF, needs to save to move, but is still going out almost every day to party or eat out or go to bars, getting coffee. A whole bunch of unnecessary shoot that's draining her financially. I suggested she saves, but OFC, that didn't get taken well. Story 79. You put 2,000 rims and 3,000 low-profile tires on your 1,000 used Ford Explorer because now it looks sick. Right. Story 80. Can I get your rent early this month? I don't have money for gas. This coming from a person who makes 8 to 10 times what I make in a year, who is going through financial restructuring on her tens of thousands of dollars in credit card debt because she can't file bankruptcy again. Story 81. The younger housekeepers at my job all drive new BMWs or Benzes. I'm in administration and make about 4 or 5x what they make, but I drive a beater Jeep that I plan on keeping until it can't drive any longer. One of the housekeepers jokingly asked me when I'm going to get myself a BMW, and I really wanted to say I can't afford it, but I didn't want to come off as a male body part, so I just left it alone. Granted, I'm pretty confident most of them sell substances in their off time, but even then, a fancy car purchase just seems unwise to me a little. Story 82. I used to work with a woman that was in more debt than I can conceptualize. In the 3 or so years we worked together, she bought 2 houses, a camper, 2 trucks, a motorcycle, a lot for the camper, remodeled both the houses, not to mention constant vacations and concerts, and being at the bar multiple nights a week buying shots for everyone. We were both making less than 20 an hour in the nursing home as CNAs. We did not have money, Lowell. She had to work 80-hour weeks to keep up with all her payments, would complain constantly about how tired and sore she was, and was just useless to have as a coworker because she was so darn tired she couldn't do anything. She would work 6 a.m., 10 p.m. multiple days a week and still manage to be at the bar between shifts. IDK what she's up to now, but probably the same shoot TBH. Story 83. Paying for tattoos, nails, and other bees when your tires are bald, live paycheck to paycheck, and have thousands of dollars racked up in tickets, 0 retirement saved, and when you have a child and live in the hood. Story 84. Can't afford decent food for your kids because we're poor, but always have the newest iPhone. I seriously have friends like this, and I don't get it. At one point, we were making 10x what they were a year, but we were the ones with the old phones and inexpensive jeans. Story 85. A Steam library full of unplayed games. Doesn't matter how much you actually paid for each game individually. If you don't play them, you've just partied too hard your money. Story 86. After starting work as lab assistant, my coworker went out and bought a brand new Mustang after being there for 3 weeks. Got his mom to co-sign. He didn't make it past 3-month probation. Story 87. I'd say anyone with designer brand clothing or merch with big logos. Those big logos are screaming, I don't have money, but I want to make you think I do. Or I just made a bunch of money and I'm going to blow it all. Never am surprised to see those people broke down the line. Story 88. I know someone who genuinely believes he is pulling off a Ponzi scheme on banks by paying one credit card with the credit from another card and so on. Story 89. Complaining about how broke you are, but still manage to find money to fund your cigarettes, plant substance habit, and of course, your pop tea because water isn't cutting it. Story 90. Getting your food delivered by the apps regularly, or even worse, getting Starbucks delivered. The 5 coffee can be excused if you are already out and on the go. A 10 coffee when you're at home really can't. Answer, far though. A few streamers I used to watch would order food all the while complaining that the fees and all that added up to be more than what they were getting. Recall one man loaning a pizza being like 40 after the fees? The biggest and best pizza I've ever had came close to 30, not delivered. She was ordering for herself from a mediocre chain. 40 just isn't worth that. Story 91. My sister has over $100,000 in student loan debt over 20 years after graduation. Her original loan was much less, but she has never made a payment, and the interest has compounded. She also has about $50,000 in debt from IVF treatments. She just bought a new car and has an $800 payment. She has a 6-figure salary, but her husband refuses to work. She owes my parents thousands of dollars. Obviously, she has no retirement savings. Story 92. They're on a payment plan for 2 designer puppies, Pomskis, $4,500 each. Guess how much I paid? $2K. No, $900. Oh, a great deal. A month? Excuse me? This is before puppy vaxes, visits, any of that. It boggles my mind. Story 93. I have a friend who owes the IRS $50,000. He still gets Grubhub several days a week, hires Mexicans to do chores around the house for him on a weekly basis, and decided to completely remodel his kitchen. Story 94. While working my first full-time job, one of my coworkers wouldn't cash her paycheck at a bank. Instead, she would head to one of those payday loan places. She would pay off whatever she owed from the previous month, then head to a local pawn shop. There she'd buy back some of the jewelry she'd pawned over previous months. She wouldn't buy everything back each month, so she was basically keeping a rotation of items in pawn. Then she'd head to the bar and drink a bunch. Within a couple weeks, we were paid monthly, she'd start the cycle over by pawning jewelry and taking out a payday loan. She never understood why she was broke. Story 95. When their cars cost like turd as much as their house. Like fudge, it's so painful to see relatively well-off people completely piss their life away just so they could have an Escalade and an F-150. 200,000 car purchases while the house costs 450,000. And I mean piss their life away because you know what a year's worth of car payments on luxury SUVs and pickups could get you? A month-long vacation in Istanbul or Mexico. Don't want a vacation. Cool. You just flushed 25,000 down the toilet. I'm sure you won't miss that when you're 50 and desperately planning for retirement. Just fudge by a Toyota Camry or a 10-year-old pickup. I guarantee you it'll be the biggest relief your wallet ever felt. Story 96. My mom and I were both earning around $75K. Same weekly rent, $220. I had a 400 PM car payment. She had 60 PM at gym membership. We both paid around 40 PM for our phone plans. I saved $32K plus spent around $3K on stuff I needed for our new baby. She took out a new credit card and owed around $10K on it by the end of the year. I literally do not know where her money goes. She's been on the same income for almost a decade and has not managed to save more than a few grand at a time, yet she rarely goes out for dinner. She has maybe a cheapish bottle of wine a week, takes public transport everywhere, etc. It's honestly so baffling. Story 97. My old roommate in the Marines would complain about not having enough money and beg people for money, but he would get Domino's every other day, 40 on pizza all the time. Then he went on leave and came back telling me he dropped 2K on ammo. I aspire not to be like him. Story 98. Planning a wedding and constantly spamming all your social media with links to your registry, as well as making PSA posts about how expensive weddings are and asking guests to at least pay $100 towards their registry or as a gift. Don't plan a wedding you can't afford. Story 99. Seeing someone start their own GoFundMe and promote it on Facebook because they're going to be evicted, have a special needs child, etc. And a few months later, seeing the post of an elaborate tattoo, saw GoFundMe again a couple years after that. I didn't donate a second time. Story 100. An expensive car when you live in an apartment. I don't care what people think about my 12-year-old Honda Civic with 200K miles on it. My home is worth more than double what I paid, and my car is worth 75 less. Keep as little money as possible in a car and prioritize buying a home, no matter how small. Story 101. My manager was late on everything with an ex-wife trying to ruin his life and get his daughter taken away with allegedly false child endangerment pedophilia claims. I was suspicious at first, but believed him. He didn't pay the electric gas bill for 8 months while fighting his ex-wife in court. He ate out every day and wanted to put new rims on Tesla Model S he got new. I asked him why he didn't care enough about keeping food on the table, the 4 walls up, and utilities paid. I have never seen someone in such denial before. I think bankruptcy should only exist for people who have every single cent monitored for the next 5 years. Story 102. Owning a timeshare. You gotta be a moron. Don't try and explain to me how yours is different. It's not. Story 103. Blowing $6 billion inheritance from your father, and that you hoodwinked from your siblings. Then begging every day for cash from your voters as you tell them how rich you are. And when they do donate once, it turns out you hoodwinked them into it being a gift that just keeps giving. Now you're stuck in criminal courts for all your thieving and don't have enough money to pay your dues there. Is that bad with money or just plain terrible? Story 104. Overspending, which is not really necessary, is just a show-off activity. Such people are bad in saving money overall. Story 105. Roommate was late on rent for several months until March and taking bus to work. Just came home with $70K brand new EV. Story 106. Cousin's boyfriend just bought a nice big truck. He's 20 years old, lives with mom and dad, and has no other bills. His payment? $1,100 a month. I lolled when I heard this. His old truck wasn't even that old and in good condition. Story 107. Dealing with a family member birching about them and their spouse spending $5K on living expenses while living in a trailer. $2,200 a month on food is extremely high, even in a HC call environment for 2 people, and they should consider not eating out regularly. $500 a month on storage of items that after a year they could have bought back new. But hey, I guess some people want to complain instead. Story 108. Had a friend who was behind on rent by a few months during COVID. He would consistently tell me about new Gundams, Legos, and VR stuff he was buying. I was not shocked at all when he eventually had his car repossessed. Story 109. A local in our small town, population 449, took a $54,000 personal loan to organize a 3-day country music festival. It was a financial disaster. This person, a bar manager, was also responsible for safeguarding $24,000 cash collected during a weekly raffle fundraiser. Somebody won the jackpot, but the money was nowhere to be found. The manager had taken friends to Vegas and lost the money. The raffle had to be paid out by a community charity. The manager tried to get loans to cover the gambling losses. He was arrested and found guilty of embezzlement. The day after the Vegas trip, his fiancée announced on Facebook the postponement of their wedding. Ouch. Story 110. Not being able to properly maintain their car. People bad with money tend to ignore maintenance because they failed to save cash. Cash for basic maintenance such as tires, oil. I can afford a new $50K sports car, but paying for the tires when they're bald in a hazard, I can't afford that. Story 111. Anyone who keeps a balance on their credit card. If you don't have the money for it now, you never will. Don't buy it until you do. Story 112. Using DoorDash, Uber Eats, and other services to get fast food like McDonald's. When all is said and done, these people are basically paying the cost of eating at a set-down restaurant to have some kid drop a bag of sometimes hot garbage on their doorstep without even ringing the doorbell. Story 113. Complaining about bills and the cost of buying a home when you make $200K a year, eat out at restaurants, and buy all the newest things. Story 114. Being homeless, and when you come into a lot of money, you spend it on a concert rather than bettering your family situation. Story 115. Dude, I was seeing February would spend all his money on going out to eat, going to the bar, plant substance, etc., but would let his dogs go hungry for days at a time because he already spent his whole paycheck. I bought multiple bags of dog food over those 2 months. Dude even had the nerve to get mad at me for buying dog food. Story 116. When you have to move into a backyard shed at a friend's house because of your debt, but you continue to trick it out with everything from espresso machines to a gaming PC. Story 117. When I first met my husband, I talked about wanting to travel, and he mentioned not having much in savings. I learned a little later on that he would Uber Eats lunch and/or dinner most days a week. Facepalm. Story 118. Har, Dr. Mafhonen. If you were homeless because you got evicted from your apartment for not paying rent for months and trashing it besides with your slobbishness, and a charity is paying for you to live in a motel room, yet you join multiple MLMs, regularly get DoorDash from restaurants you can walk or drive 2 minutes to, buy a new pet, constantly buy wine, get piercings and other frivolous things, and then post about it all on social media. Story 119. I have to Uber a lot to work. I always side-eye whenever the Uber that picks me up is a BMW, Mercedes, and even a Maserati once. Story 120. Worked with a guy years back. His wife was always looking immaculate. Big collection of shoes, several pairs of Louboutin, etc. Big collection of high-end designer handbags. He left, but I still saw them regularly for the next 5 years. On the bus into town from the shoot little flat they lived in the nasty shoot part of town we were stuck in. I was one person earning very little money, but renting basically the same apartment that they had bought a decade earlier, 2 streets away. So much cheaper costs. And on 2 good wages, they still couldn't afford to move anywhere better. They disliked their neighbors. They disliked the estate we lived on, but they must have been in such massive debt that they couldn't move anywhere nicer. They were still out there when I finally moved 4 years ago. Imagine living somewhere you dislike for 15 years, just so that you can walk through the dog shit-strewn streets to the bus stop in the best designer clothes and accessories. Story 121. I work at an auto shop that specializes in tires. When people come in with top-of-the-line, usually German cars, and then choose the crappiest, cheapest tires to put on them. Then our mechanic mentions they pick the cheapest brakes. They could afford just the car, but then can't spend the money to take care of the car the right way. Story 122. Blowing money you don't have on, shoot, you don't need to impress people who don't give a fudge. My uncle is a good example of this. Some background. My mother's side of the family, back in the day, was rich. Rich. Servant having, luxury car owning, chauffeured around, rich. Long story short, my grandfather made a fuck ton of money after WURO by running plantations and factories, warehouses, and built himself up a fat fortune from it. When he died, he divided his business empire between his 3 sons, my uncles. The girls, my mother and her sisters, got some money, but that was about it. Anyway, 2 of the 3 brothers sold off all their interests in Grandpa's fancy investments. Apparently, warehousing was too dirty for them or whatever, and they just lived off the proceeds for the next 50-odd years. For a long time, things were okay. They had big fancy houses, they had servants, they had housemaids. My cousins went to fancy schools, etc. But my uncle, the youngest brother, is a terrible gambler. He'd blow thousands on races and casinos and stuff, and bit by bit, the family fortune dwindled down to nothing. The other uncles and aunts were fine, because they had jobs and stuff, or they managed what was left of Grandpa's companies. But this particular uncle has literally never worked a day in his life. He just lived off the inheritance, and now it's all gone. My aunt divorced him, and yeah, if he'd been sensible with the money, he'd still be more than loaded today. But somehow, he pissed away a fortune worth, I would have to guess, hundreds of millions in the space of about 50 years, and now he literally doesn't have 2 pennies to rub together. If not for my various cousins, he'd literally be homeless by now. Story 123. All the posts are about people spending more than they can afford. There is also the tightwads who could afford heat but sit in the cold, who could afford nice things but force their family to go without. I went on holidays with one of these sorts of people once, and it was miserable. The whole holiday they were avoiding anything that cost money. Like, why even go if you are going to be like that? Story 124. That is my SIL. She and her late husband got a home equity loan for the home that his parents gave them. Instead of fixing the place, they went on vacations. He bought a huge TV. We were buying everything for their kids. We love them. They did that twice and then lost the house. That continued until she met her now husband, and now they both have jobs. Story 125. I know a girl who is in her late 20s who still lives with her mom. She doesn't have a work currently and is not even planning on it. Doesn't help her mom at all from what I've heard, since the mom complains to others about it. Well, this girl, back when she was still working, bought a fudge MacBook for like $1,700 USD for her plans. She never took it out of the box. Never used it. Nothing. It was collecting dust for close to 5 years, the last 3 of which she was unemployed. You think that's the financially bad decision? Well, after those 5 years, she decided to sell it for like a half of what it cost before and decided to spend it all on a vacation. She went on a vacation to Tunisia or some shoot for 2 weeks, then came back, broke, and it went right into how it was before. She still doesn't work and lives with her mom a year later. Story 126. I'm guilty here, but relying on food delivery services like Uber Eats or DoorDash near daily because I'm too lazy to cook OTLR, even reheat my meal preps. I'll try one thing, be obsessed with that item, just check my balance, scream, and attempt to quit cold turkey by deleting the apps. Nothing stops me from reinstalling though. Story 127. My youngest brother, 20, who hasn't held a single job longer than a year, decided to get an 18,000 car BMW and like a 10,000 motorcycle Harley in the same month. He wrecked the motorcycle a few months after he got it. Our whole family tried to tell him to get something cheap first, but clearly luxury items were more important at the time than living comfortably. I hope the insurance paid off the bike, so he has less to worry about. Story 128. I came here to say it's me. I scream I'm bad with money, but reading y'all's responses has me feeling better about myself. Story 129. Spending $25 on a single crappy fast food meal, worth $9 if you were to go in person, door to Schuber, etc. Story 130. My friend's brother. He was making six figures until he decided to start his own company and took some risks that caused it to tank. His mother had loaned him a good portion of her 401k as a way to help him with the promise that he would pay it back once his business took off. It all went to hell when he filed bankruptcy. He was living in this giant McMansion, but didn't have the money to buy groceries for him and his family. His mother covered him for groceries a few times. For context, she makes maybe $18 an hour at her job. Around the same time this happened, my friend noticed a video he had posted on social media with him, dressed in an inflatable unicorn suit, goofing off in front of his kids. He had mentioned he had just bought it on a whim. It was like $75. Dude, your mom is buying your groceries for you. You owe her life savings, but you're going to impulse purchase a fudge unicorn suit? Answer. A few months ago, I brought some food to a lady in my local but nothing group. It sounded like she'd been through a lot recently, and she didn't chance custody of her kid at the time. I gave her the food and we chatted some. She mentioned that she had a friend who was going to loan or give her $100 to go gamble. She couldn't afford food, but was using a friend's money for going to a casino. Story 131. Some of my friends recently turned 18, and so they can do a lot more stuff now without their parents' permission. One of those things is gambling. They don't gamble in big amounts, but they gamble a lot. They usually put in like 110 on a bet, but they make a bet almost every single day. Just this week, I think one of them have made around 10 bets on football, hockey, or whatever. They are also very interested in sports, especially football and hockey. And the funny thing is, they know so much that they almost know what team's going to win, yet they bet on the other team because that's where the big bucks are. Story 132. Saw my ex open a bill and throw it away instead of paying it. I said, why'd you just throw that away? They'll send me a new one. One day, she comes to me crying about another bill she couldn't afford, and I pay it. Maybe I should get another tattoo. We didn't last much longer. Story 133. Using a 1,000 tax return to make a 1,000 purchase, complaining about low wages and also paying to have food delivered for lunch every workday, spending 3 months' salary on a diamond engagement ring, buying a fancy car on a loan when you still live paycheck to paycheck, owning a truck that isn't 100 necessary for your day-to-day life as your only vehicle. Story 134. Many people have touched on this concept, but always wearing expensive clothing and accessories. I'm not saying you should never buy something for special occasions, but you should only buy something special when your coffers are full. You don't need to wear super expensive underwear because hardly anyone sees it anyways. You don't need a closet full of expensive shoes to walk around comfortably. You don't need a 1,000 winter jacket to survive the winter. You don't need 400 sunglasses to shield your eyes from sunlight. You don't need a 50 t-shirt to wear around the house when you can buy a bunch of cheaper ones for the same amount of money. People have this weird male body part measuring ego when it comes to what they wear. It probably goes back to the beginning of humanity. In reality, only the one can easily afford the fancy name brands, and they still don't even need them. There are plenty of average name brands that come out with great clothing. So whenever I see someone wearing super expensive clothing and accessories who isn't a millionaire, I can tell they are bad with money. Story 135. People who buy Starbucks, Dutch Bro, etc. specialty drinks multiple times a week. 6 a day adds up rather quickly. Story 136. Smart devices for the sake of it. Had a coworker once talk about desperately needing money. The week after, he was talking about how quickly his trash can run out of batteries. Story 137. I mean, having a nice car when you're unemployed is a classic, but something that often gets missed is when people tell me that they made money in their house, but don't know the roar because they don't understand the costs and expenses. I also have a friend whose mortgage is $6,000 and is borderline negative equity position, but refuses to sell and rent because we are all in the same boat. We aren't. That's illogical. Also, I have a friend who has cash to pay off her mortgage, but thinks it's better to keep that money in cash and carry debt, but refuses to invest in the stock market and just keeps it in cash. Also, I have friends that doesn't understand how RSPs and RESPs work and refuse to invest in them when they would benefit because of their high income. And there's more. I have friends who have had a very high income for 10 years, but their net worth is only half of their current year's salary. It's like, where did the money go? I have a friend who could have owed zero in taxes, but she missed the RSP deadline, and now her paycheck is being garnished because she hasn't done her taxes in 10 years. Meanwhile, she goes around paying for rent and buying cars for her family members. I have so many examples. Story 138. My dad winning 20 grand at the casino, and instead of using it to prevent us from going homeless, he spent it on a used BMW Z3 that ended up falling apart and not being sellable. Story 139. Credit card debt because of tattoos. Like nice, expensive tattoos. They also complain they don't have money for healthy groceries or vacations. Story 140. 80K a Harley Davidson customized and decked out in a trailer park. Shelbyville Inn in front of a trailer worth $6K in a good day. Story 141. Having an insane amount of credit card debt that you can't get out from under and making really good money at work. Story 142. Having to borrow money from parents but then post photos on social media of them living the high lifestyle. Seen it firsthand. Story 143. The combination of, I got my money today, let's go out, and I don't have any money. It's the end of the month. So many people spend most money the moment they get it and then have problems paying for basics, such as a proper meal at the end of the month. Story 144, maxing our credit cards, buying non-essentials, then getting a windfall of money and not paying off those cards, and instead blowing that money on non-essential or non-emergency things too, and continuing to make MI payments at 30. Story 145, driving a car that has a total cost 50 of your salary, with exceptions, of course, like if your car is critical to your work. Story 146. I know someone that works up to 72 hours a week and makes over 45 an hour. He was about 45K in debt. Also, he was only 21 at the time. I actually loaned him 2K, which was 90 of my savings, when I didn't have a job because he couldn't afford rent and gas to get to work. It took him 2 years to pay me back. Story 147. I knew a guy won almost $500,000 on the lotto. He proceeded to buy 2 fully loaded Ford Broncos and 2 Ford Raptor trucks, all brand new, just him and his wife. No kids. Now has none of the money and still a full mortgage to pay. Story 148. I've had many broke poor friends who would meanie about money and how they are struggling, yet were very excited to show me their new snake and glass enclosure heat lamp they just bought. Story 149. There was a Reddit post I read just yesterday. A guy emptied his savings to pay off his mortgage because he was worried about debt, even though he had 25K in credit card debt, then racked up 40Ks more on his credit cards for repairs on his home. That whole decision-making process and not having home insurance. Story 150. I've seen commercials for taking out small loans to pay for vacations and weddings. That's just playing with fire. Story 151. Doing or saying anything suggestive of money burning a hole in their pocket. If their response to having money is having to spend it, they probably don't have savings by choice. Story 152. New leased high-end car, but your house looks like a derelict chute hole with a broken driveway gate and weeds all over the lawn. Story 153. DoorDash or any apps for food delivery. You might as well just set your money on fire. What a waste.